Everyone, welcome to episode 9 of the Business as Usual podcast, the UK's first and best business studies educational podcast for students studying GCSE, A-level. I don't know if any degree students listen to it, probably not, but you could, theoretically. I'm sure it would all be relevant. I haven't heard of any who are doing that, but never mind, maybe they will. We're going to go through 3 news stories today, and we're going to give you some other things to have a little bit of a research of in your own time. I'm joined by my co-host, Mike Sawyer, who you can get on at Twitter at Mr. M. Sawyer, and my name's Jack Goodrich. You can get me at Mr. J. Goodrich. You can also follow us on Instagram at Business as Usual with an underscore at the end because Business as Usual was taken. And you can subscribe on YouTube, subscribe on Spotify, so that you can get these every Friday. We're doing them every Friday, so a great thing to listen to over the weekend, ready to have really high quality discussions with your teachers and with your students on the Monday morning. Mike, you're doing it you're sending it to all your students and making sure that they listen to it each week?
I'm indeed, yes, yeah, posting it out to everyone that does business and economics in my school. So hearing about in the corridors.
And some people who don't do business, because I think you said you accidentally sent it to everyone.
Well, everyone can benefit from listening. Why not?
So hopefully the benefit stretches much further. So the first news story we're going to have a little bit of a look at today is Arcadia. So you'll probably have studied Arcadia, but if you haven't, you won't really know them as Arcadia. You'll probably know them as Topshop, Miss Selfridge, Dorothy Perkins, Top Man. Arcadia Group's owned by Sir Philip Green, who you might have come across when you've done leadership styles in school, because he's quite renowned for his leadership style, isn't he? They've had a bit of a tough time of it as of late, and they last year only just avoided closure by restructuring a little bit. They agreed to rent cuts with a bunch. What that basically means is they agreed lower rents with the landlords of some of their stores, up to 70% in some areas and 40% in others. And despite that, hopefully reducing costs for them, hopefully allowing that business to survive and keep those jobs on the high street, keep those stores open on the high street. They have confirmed that they're going to close at least 12, but potentially up to 25 stores, places including Wolverhampton, Newbury, Blackburn, Bolton, including one of their flagship stores, high-profile stores in Stratford, in Westfield, Stratford, in East London. So it's not been an easy few years for Topshop, has it?
No. I mean, we've talked about the battle on the high street, and in particular in the clothing market, haven't we? So I think online again, killing the high street, and we're seeing another story linked to it. So it's a slow demise, by the sounds of it, the high street.
We talked a little bit about this last week with a business like Superdry, for example, struggling, but Arcadia definitely. The signs have been clear for a while, haven't they? I think that Topshop and Top Man's boss resigned last month, and he'd only been there for 2 years, so it's not like he'd been there for a long period of time. They've had heavy discounting, trying to get their prices low to try and compete with a lot of these online retailers, but obviously it's not working. It says the week before, in the article I read earlier, the week before Christmas, Topshop and Miss Selfridge discounted by up to 60%, because they're sort of positioning themselves a little bit more similarly to H&M and Primark rather than and the ASOS and Boohoo rather than sort of high end businesses in that market. So it's been a pretty tough week for Arcadia. And Mike, you got a story about gambling businesses?
Yes, so I mean, it's not often that we have legislation that comes in from the government that helps businesses. But back in 2005, the Labour government under Tony Blair relaxed laws on gambling, and that has seen the industry go from strength to strength, and now takes £14.4 billion from UK punters each year, which equates to about £200 from every man, woman, and child in the UK, which is a crazy amount when you think about it. And it's created some billionaires since then. So the Betfred boss, 2 bosses I should say, are now both billionaires, and now they're coming under scrutiny again. So they are looking to ban use of credit cards in the very near future. So I guess that's what Boris and the Tories will be working on, passing through Parliament in the next couple of months. So it'll be interesting to see if that will make much impact on their revenues. Yeah,
there's £200 from every person is outrageous, especially when you consider I very much doubt a lot of those children are going to be gambling. So it means the adults probably spending a huge amount of money. The credit card issue is an interesting one, because you would think that it would be common sense that you can't gamble with money you don't currently have. So it seems like that one's a little bit of long time coming. But there's been quite a lot of controversy around gambling. Anyway, I remember when I was a sort of teenager, they banned advertisement on TV for cigarettes, and obviously there's been loads of legislation about cigarettes over the last several years. They've changed the way that alcohol's advertised. You have to have sort of disclaimers saying please drink responsibly, and in the past alcohol adverts were about people having fun, having a drink. Now they're almost serious, and there's more focus on the risks than there is the enjoyment side of things. And I wonder if there's obviously a lot of pressure on gambling firms to kind of go the same way.
Yes, definitely. I mean, they still advertise, don't they? I mean, in the breaks, I think, but not once kickoff occurs in a football match now. I think that's the legislation they didn't actually pass legislation, I don't think. I think they preempted it and tried to take a step to be responsible before they got laws that would make it tricky for them. But it seems to have only kept them away from the door for a little while. So it's going to be tough. I mean, they had the FOBT crackdown, didn't they? In the stores where you could do the £2 a throw kind of fruit machine, wasn't it?
Yes. Yeah. Or the grabbers where we've all been to the amusements or whatever, and you think, right, okay, I'm going to put like 20p in here and try and get a giant like Woody from Toy Story cuddly toy or something like that. And it's frustrating when you think you've got a good grab on the toy, and then as soon as it starts to lift up, you can see the claws sort of release.
This sounds like a painful childhood memory, Jack.
Clearly, I didn't win another release when I was young. The whistle thing you mentioned about not having advertisements during like a sports event, in particular football, was because they were concerned about the impact on children. So they didn't want children watching football matches to be influenced by these gambling things. And so I think that was an official ban, but that doesn't take away from the fact that some football stadiums are named after betting companies. I think more than half of the Premier League teams are sponsored, like right on the chest, are sponsored by betting companies, even though they're not allowed on children's versions of like replica kits. When they've got the posters of, and it's probably not very many Newcastle United players on posters of people's walls, but if they have a poster of like Andy Carroll or someone like that on their wall, like I do at home in my bedroom, it's got funny EA written across the chest. And so another really high profile example was the Wayne Rooney one, wasn't there, with the 32 red?
Yeah, and there was that viral piece of advertising, weren't there? Was it with Brighton that were sponsored by Paddy Power, and they took it off the front, didn't they?
They did a pre-season game with Paddy Power literally across the entire top, and it was a massive publicity stunt. They're just finding other ways of getting their name out there, aren't they? But I do wonder if it will go the same way. 5-10 years down the line, will you actually be able to see adverts for gambling sites? Will they be able to do promotion at all? Given that it can induce addiction, and given that it can lead to people racking up huge amounts of debt, and it becomes sort of almost like a societal issue, doesn't it?
Yes, I mean, Betfred have been quite interesting because they've seen it as an opportunity, haven't they? They opened up their own gambling rehab centre, which was private. So they've made millions from treating the gambling addicts that they've created on their Betfred site. How good is that? I mean, not good, obviously, but
it's innovative business.
Innovative is that?
We're looking at all types of business here on the Business as Usual podcast. It's not just the ones that are ethical. We're also looking at the unethical businesses as well.
Oh, thank you for covering me there, Jack.
Yeah, no worries. The last big news story we want to have a look at, it's not going to be a very long one, but we just want to bring attention to the news about Alphabet this week. Alphabet, if you don't recall, we mentioned them, we studied them a little while ago because they changed a leader, but Alphabet is the company that owns Google. So it was kind of created to allow Google search engines and what have you to exist separate to the other ventures like investments in self-driving cars and what have you. They this week became the fourth company in the world to be valued at more than $1 trillion. And I think that happened yesterday. And it's based on the price of their shares. They passed 1 trillion Thursday night, and the shares closed at $1,450 each. So if you want to buy a share in Alphabet, so you want to buy a share in Google, it's going to cost you about $1,500. And the reason that that's significant is because in 2004, when they initially put their shares on the stock market, they were $85 per share. So there's some very lucky investors who bought in. Well, not lucky, very, very clever investors who bought in really, really early, whose shares were worth $85 when they bought them and now are worth $1,500.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I mean, there was, I remember the race was on to become the first, well, the second, I should say, $1 trillion company between Amazon and Apple. I remember writing a case study for it. So it's interesting that, they're not far behind them. Because I think it was only a year or 2 years ago that the second and third $1 trillion companies were crowned. And Google aren't stopping there, are they? I saw them agree a takeover of Fitbit. So more diversification going on at Google.
Yeah, the other one, by the way, is Microsoft. So Microsoft, Apple, and Amazon are the first three, and obviously Alphabet now has become the fourth one. They reckon that most of it's because of their grip on the search market, boosting advertising revenues from YouTube. They obviously took over YouTube a few years ago. Android mobile phones are doing pretty well, and as you've mentioned, they're sort of, they're diversifying a little bit into this fitness trend that's really growing at the moment. Some analysts have predicted it might hit the $2 trillion mark, which would be an insane amount of money, really. An insane amount of money that these businesses are. And they're all tech companies as well. Goes to show that just where the money is in the sort of 21st century. We've got 3 news stories for you to have a bit of a research of as well. So we're not going to go through these, but these are the kind of things that you should really be aware of if you're a business studies student, things that are going on in the business world around you. Mike, do you want to start off?
Yes, number 1, Flybe confirms it is going to receive tax and duty holiday.
Number 2, the US and China are having loads of tensions. The UN have warned that could slow down the global economy. Number
3, Rolls-Royce develop jet engines aiming to make our flying greener.
Good luck with that. I think, well, everyone's going to be trying to do that, but who's going to be successful in saving the planet from the incredible damage that air travel does? That being said, I'm going to New York next month, so I'm contributing just as much as anyone else. Never mind.
I was going to say.
Yeah, I might have to plant a tree when I'm out there.
I think it might be more than one.
More than one tree. I might have to plant a forest when I get back there, yeah. So there's 3 news stories that we've gone through, 3 news stories for you to research for yourself. Have a look through those and discuss them with your classmates and with your teachers. I'm sure they'll really appreciate it. I'm sure a teacher would be really impressed if you went up to them and said, oh, do you know what? I was just reading about this or that, or I was reading about the US and the China tensions and how it could affect the economy. And they'd be really, really impressed with that. But also, these kind of things, all it takes is one of these businesses to come up in a case study in an exam, and you're at a huge advantage if you know what is going on in the world around you, and you can bring in information about these markets. As I mentioned at the start, subscribe on YouTube, subscribe on Spotify, follow us on Twitter and Instagram so that you can get reminded of when these come up. But they are every Friday. They're only usually about 12 to 15 minutes long, so just something you can listen to on your walk home from school or during break time or something like that. Thank you very much, Mike.
Yep, cheers, Jack. See you later, guys.